Everything you wanted to know about getting into the creative flow. This week on The Core of the Matter, brought to you by Core Comms. Welcome. I'm Adrian Smith, Managing Director at Core Comms. We deliver marketing and communications with passion, excellence and trust. We're not just talking about coming up with that big campaign idea. We're talking about a process around creative that best harnesses the whole team, from the creative director, media strategist, account manager, and most importantly, the client. Today on The Core of the Matter, we're talking to Core Comms Creative Director Nat Hiller and Account Director Ali Brennan about how they harness all of these moving parts to deliver value for money for clients. Also, they'll tell us how a creative brief is useful for projects like video, websites, and even technical documents, and how a little bit of money spent on getting the brief right will save on the other end for the client. Before we start off, it wouldn't be a discussion about marketing without a good statistic to kick us off. A 2019 study by Hootsuite and We Are Social found globally we are spending on average 6 hours and 42 minutes online each day. Much of that consuming content, news, blogs, video, podcasts and ads, good and bad. Good ideas still work for brands, but in this cluttered and complex world, how do we harness our best creative people, manage time and budgets and still get results? The creative brief. So, Nat, I'll ask you first as a creative, what is it that you want to get out of a creative brief to inspire you?
Well, as a creative, we have to turn the brief into an aspirational story of telling the client story to the viewer as succinctly as possible. So as simple as possible, I guess. So yeah, as much information as we can get is really important, and as we go through the creative process, we might edit that down to a point where we have, a couple of sentences, a 30-second ad, 100 words, a big idea, a headline, or with social media, a couple of screens, 5 seconds.
And you're the creative, so you have to try and find inspiration and come up based under time constraints and budget constraints. And then you have an account director in someone's role like Ali who has to manage this whole process. So I guess when you're trying to get a client's creative brief together, Ali, what sort of tips and tricks are you doing? What are you putting in place to make sure that the client feels like they're a part of the journey and the creatives are getting what they want?
So I guess from my point of view, it's about getting all of the information from the client and then distilling it down in a way that is everything that Nat needs to know, or the creative needs to know. So it's getting a bit about the background of the client, the objectives, what do they want to say, who do they want to say it to. We're talking about the target audience, the strategy, and pulling the strategy out of what the client wants. So. I guess it's about communication with the client and keeping them across it. The creative brief is something that we write internally, but often, the client gets to sign off on it, and that keeps them happy and I guess prevents surprises.
And that's a big thing, isn't it? When you're coming up with the creative idea, or you're producing a TVC or a special document, when it gets to the client and they go, this isn't what I asked for, or this isn't what I want. So that creative brief really is important. Yeah.
So it's got all the information in there. The unique selling proposition is often the major bit of the brief, the most important bit of the brief, because that's where the big idea will come from. As long as the client signed off on that, then what we deliver, if we deliver on brief, should be what the client wants.
And Nat, I guess for you as the creative, what are the things that you are doing, the tips and tricks? You get this creative brief and, it's only a page, Ali, or, it's never a long document.
It's a simple thing. So I was always told right from the start of my career in account management, in advertising, a good creative brief is never more than a page.
Mm. So Nat, what are you trying to get out of that to find your inspiration?
Well, I think you have to start with what the client's done in the past, really gauge how creative they want to go, I mean, the key is for the viewer or the consumer to remember this little snippet of information that's going out. You know, it's one snippet in thousands that someone sees every day, and so you've got to be memorable, and you've got to keep that in mind. The client will want to get as much information as they can into the ad, or ideally one piece of information to make them stand out. And you have to kind of put it together as creatively as possible, using the information that they provide, also using gauging the look and feel that you think they want. And so, I mean, you can be direct too, and you can ask, you know, what do you like? What creative have you seen that you've liked? Which often aren't on briefs, but it's, you know, it might be a meeting you have. To get them thinking outside the square, and really bring them on the journey.
Because it's about translating, isn't it? You might have a CEO or a marketing team who have a particular focus, and they're trying, you know, they're giving you their money to translate this idea out to their audience, and we're the ones that have the key to that audience, and we know those things to get to that audience. But you're taking them along on that journey. So what I thought would be fun to do would just be step through a bit of a creative brief, and look, there's briefs for videos, there's briefs for, you know, an annual report might have a creative brief. Just, you know, a simple brochure might have a creative brief. So they do change from one to the other, but let's just sort of step through some of the things that we grab, and I'll just be keen to get your insights from Ali from a client perspective and Nat from a creative perspective as to, you know, why is that bit of information important. So the background, the history, challenges and opportunities, barriers or drivers. So why would we have that in the creative brief for you, Ali?
So let's look at this. Let's say the designer or the creative might have no idea who the client is. So you've always got to start with giving them a little bit of background, because you know, they need to know who the client is, what the client does, anything they might have done before. A little bit of insight from the client as well is what we're aiming for in the brief. So any insights are going to be valuable in translating that into creative in the end. So the background is really just the setup, who they are, what they do, and what's the need for the project that we're working on.
And so for you, Nat, that is important, because you might not know anything about this organisation or brand until you read the brief.
Yeah, well, there's a lot you have to take in as well as background. It's, you know, it might be who their competitors are. So, you know, you might look at their website, look at all the competitors' websites and just see where they fit. And they'll, you know, be instrumental in telling you that as well. You basically have to work out where they sit in the scheme of things, and that's the start of, you know, working out the creative process, I guess.
And then the business objectives, that's sort of into that, you know, once you know who they are, what is it they're trying to do, Ali?
So normally a client will come to us with a problem or an issue that needs solving. They need communication around that, and that's what we have to do. So that would be the objective. And yeah, that can vary, I guess. So in the brief you describe that and describe the issue they have, or whatever they need to solve. What are the objectives, basically? And
that could be a really broad strategic objectives.
Absolutely.
We want to be number one in the market for our product or service. Nat, what would you be getting out of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, the objective's really important. If it's pure branding and they want to be an aspirational product or an aspirational service that stands out in the marketplace. Actually, I remember reading somewhere, you know, branding, marketing, graphic design, you could turn a horse race into an annual pilgrimage, or you could turn a bushwalk into a world-class scenic kind of 5-day, you know, life-changing event. Obviously, you know, both would have to be really good, but the marketing and brand design, advertising could if it's done really well, can push it to heights where it gets there. So, you know, it's really important to get the objective right. The other point is it could be selling a product. 50% off. So, you have to be really simple, and in that case, tell the public tell the target market what they really want.
And so that goes nicely into this next line in our brief, which is the marketing objectives, Ali. So this is getting into the syntax of actually what you want to do with this specific part of the campaign or the product that you're creating.
Yeah, so there the client would have told us that, this is, they have an aim. I want to get, 400,000 sales, or I want a certain amount of people to be aware of something. There would always need to be some kind of measurement at the end of the campaign, I guess, to confirm that. But it's fairly simple. You can have a call that would be directed by the call to action. So we need to get people to our website or get people into the store or something like that.
And that's a big part of what you do when you're thinking about that creative output, Nat.
It's actually changed remarkably over the last probably even 5 years, where we can actually get statistics on how many people have clicked on social media through to, websites. From a creative perspective, that's really important because you can kind of tell what works and what doesn't. As far as the creative process goes, I don't think it's changed too much. The objective is really to be simple and to the point, and the less time it takes for the target viewer to get through to the website to buy the product or to use the service, the better, I think.
So measurement, you just mentioned it there. Like, this is really important, isn't it, when it comes from a client perspective, so that we're setting the standard for what everyone's going to measure it by, Ali. So what are the kind of things that you would talk about in when you're writing in that measurement part of the brief with the client?
Well, I guess it's what measure. It depends on what measurements are in place, I suppose. So as Nat said, it's you can count the amount of people who've been on a social media post or responded to things or shared or been on, Google Analytics will give you who comes to a website. Other people, larger clients, I suppose, would have undertaken research before to set a benchmark, and then if a campaign was to do with brand awareness, they'd be able to reassess that, say 12 months down the line, and assess the success of a campaign. But it's always, in any good marketing plan, there's always some measurables there.
And Nat, how do you the measurement? Did it work or not? Is for you? Is that right?
Well, Trent would call it a thumb stopper. If the creative's good enough to get people to stop, read the ad, and click through or tap through to the website. So my job as creative is to get people to stop their thumbs, I guess. That's, of course, on social media. TV and press are different and more a branding objective, or, if it's a retailer ad, it's callous.
And in that retailer space, that's really easy in this next part of the brief is the competitive landscape. So you sort of touched on it from a broader perspective, but when you're really drilling down to the campaign or the whatever it is that you're creating, that competitive landscape is actually important for that context in the market.
Yeah, I mean, we need to know who else is in that space, who's doing what. Examine other people's collateral and websites and messaging as well. And that's the important thing is the messaging. You can't go out saying exactly the same as your competitor. You just need to say the same thing in a different way and better.
Nat?
Yeah, if you're a high-end product, your creative has to be high-end, higher than your competitors. That doesn't necessarily mean spending a lot of money on it. It might mean be more creative about your approach. There are certain indicators that'll, make it, put you in a space where you need to be compared to your competitors. If it's cheap, your creative might, reflect that. Just get straight to the point and off you go.
So this next one is very important, and who are we talking to? This has such a huge bearing. For the client's got to be clear on this. The media planners need to know this, and the creatives need to know this. So, Ali, what sort of things are you trying to draw out of the client?
So what age are we talking to? Are we talking to somebody who's a teenager or a mid-20s or a retired person. It's all every product has a different audience, or some products, I suppose, or campaigns can be as broad as from age 20 to 70 and all inclusive. So, but it's all really important. It all guides the direction of the creative and the messaging. So target audience is one of the most important things on a creative brief, I guess.
And you need to be able to sit with media planners and others, not just the creative director.
And I suppose a media planner, they would like a few more specifics, and they're very much into demographics and that kind of thing, whereas a creative is probably less so for them. It's more about the right message and how we talk to the person. What is the kind of language they will understand and respond to.
And Nat, what do you get out of that? Where do you go for creative inspiration, and when you see what that who are we talking to piece?
We did some video. Some mobile ads to try and attract some young people to apprenticeship schemes, and it was a bit of an eye opener for me because I've got my graphic design rules which I like to stick to, and it's very simple text to the point, whereas we experimented with some emojis and some crazy type, and it really worked. So you have to put yourself in the head of who's looking at it, and just talk to as many people in that target market as you need to find out what they're looking at. Use the web, just do what you can to get the message, get the story to that audience.
And that's that gold dust, isn't it? That's where if Ali, as the client-facing person in the campaign, does the right thing and it comes through to the creative team and the media planners, the gold dust is that you have that ability to put yourself in the shoes of the target audience and speak to them the way they want to be spoken to, because they are going to consume that content, or they're going to respond more favourably.
You have to be authentic, because you'll be seen straight through by, if you're trying to be young and you're not necessarily, then that audience will see straight through you and write it off straight away. They won't even look. So you do have to do lots of research. You have to know, well, as a creative, I spend most of my day looking at creative, applications, research. It's what I enjoy doing. A bit of a nerd. So you see different ways of getting messages across to different target audiences. And so I think you just use that experience. So
the desired response is the next on our how we go about doing our creative briefs. So is this a call to action, Ali? Is it?
It's I guess it is. It's what do we want people to say and feel and think when they see the campaign. So if the call to action is a direct one of visit our website, then that's what we need to get people to do. Or it could be something more about a feeling or a gut reaction that we want people to get from a campaign.
And that this would be a pretty enjoyable part of the creative process for you, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all aspirational. You want to set the benchmark a little bit ahead of where the person is at. I think I heard a statistic. People think they're 10 years younger than they actually are. So when you're representing a certain target market, it's obviously not really young people, but when you're representing a target market, you want to show someone slightly younger, looking really good, and it's what that person wants to be, so what they want to aspire to. That's a generalisation, but we really do look at that sort of thing, and we want to put the product service in a good light. It's often really important to do that. And
certainly Trent from Core Comms and Craig as well, our marketing director, they do talk about that and the halo effect and how important that is, and so why the creative people are so important in that, and to have their eye on that for the client, because you will find clients go, I want to someone who looks like this in an ad. And it's up to us, I guess, Ali, to be able to, I guess, sometimes push back and say, actually, no, we need to do it like this because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I think often a client will have their own opinions and their own thinking, I guess, on how they think a campaign would look. But it's up to us as the creative agency we can push back sometimes because we have interpreted what they want to say, and there might be ways that we would recommend saying it and how we'd recommend saying it that actually don't quite fit with what the client had originally thought. Yeah.
And they might know their customers well. They might know their products really, really well. But they might not necessarily know how to speak to their customers about their products really well. And that's what the creative brief is, hopefully going to do. It's going to harness all of those things and everyone walks out happy.
Yeah, that's right. I think, they've obviously come to us for a reason. So it's leaving it up to the creative brains to say the things in the right way and get to the target audience in the correct way.
This next part of the creative brief I absolutely love. It's the single-minded proposition, and this is challenging. That's probably the hardest bit to get right in the brief, and the hardest bit for the client to get their head around when they want to fit in so many messages. Ali, how do you do this with a client?
You're right. It's absolutely the hardest bit of the brief to write. It's always the bit of the brief that I write last, and it can change a million times before I kind of settle on something, and then probably in discussion with the creatives say, is this the right way we're going to go? Because often that little piece of the brief, which can lead to a headline or the campaign look and feel, the campaign line, if it's a winner USP in the brief, then that really directs a whole campaign. But it is hard for the clients sometimes when they're trying to say 4 things and we've got to distill it down into one line. It's difficult, but when you get it right, it really works.
And Nat, for them, it's that conversation as a creative. You're trying, I guess, to come up with that one line that just says one thing. So their investment absolutely is behind that one thing, as opposed to trying to say 4 and they spend all of that money and no one listens to any of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I got told once by a creative director of mine that the headline or the big idea is usually written in the brief. So the words are there. If the brief is good, you can usually edit it right down to one idea, which is really interesting because often it's a play on words or a double meaning or something like that. And it's worth studying very hard, I think, the brief.
So this is another one that we put in ours, and this wouldn't be in all creative briefs, but why is it true is a question that we ask. Ali, why do we put that in there?
We put that in there because that's the support for the unique selling proposition. So it's kind of the backup line of why we're saying what we're saying. So it's no more than that, really. It's just there as support, I guess. But it's an important one because there's no point in writing something that isn't authentic, as it isn't true. You can't sell something if it's not true, I guess.
Yeah, and that gives you confidence, I guess, Nat, with your creative approach.
Yeah, truth in advertising. But really, more and more these days, it's about authentic storytelling because people have seen so much. They want to hear about the individual behind the product. And they want to hear, authentic banter or a story or how someone's got to where they want to, got to where they are today. And, that may be in the background, but it might tease out a fantastic creative, approach. So,
tone and manner is the next one on the list, and that's, I guess, really quite obvious. And I think you would probably draw some of those things out of what you would read in that creative brief. But it's an important part as well, isn't it, Ali?
Yeah, I think we've touched on this slightly before, but that's where if a client has really strong values in their organisation, so for example, core comps, passion, excellence, trust, that would be the way that we talk to people with passion, excellence and trust. So it's really important for a client that they can get across who they are, that we're on brand. So that's where the tone and manner is really important. So it's about getting all of that information there so that we know how we want to talk to people.
Nat, and what would you use the tone and manner for in when you're creating something?
Yeah, well, I think if it's TV, then you've got to adhere to the type of client it is. So as I spoke about the competitors before, where they sit on that, if it's a luxury product, or you want your tone and manner to reflect where the product is. If it's a look and a feel, design wise, then the tone and manner might reflect the style guide that they have, with the spin of the headline we've come up with. So it's really important.
And only a few more to go. So the next one on our list is the proposed media. Why do we have that in there, Ali?
That's really just functional to advise the creatives on what they're doing, because a campaign could be anything from TV to or a radio script or a press ad or it's a poster. So it's really that functional. It's nothing exciting, that one. It's just, this is what we're aiming for, and I guess the media plan would confirm that. But yeah, it's just to give some direction as to what the outputs are. So sometimes that might be just what you might call that deliverables, I suppose.
And that's a bit of an iterative process, isn't it? Like, you do come back after meeting with the client, and you would be kicking those things around with the media buyers and the creatives.
Yeah, so it's I guess sometimes it's just guidelines rather than this is set in stone. But some of the brief is really not exciting. It's more about having an actual, just the facts written down.
Yeah. Really important one here, timings. So, time is just one of those things that, as you get closer to the deadline, the pressure comes on, and, some people get inspired in that. And so that really sets a standard for the whole team.
It's always good to give a creative team an idea of the timing required. Sometimes we might say, we need this press ad and we need it now, or we need it tomorrow, or we need it in 3 weeks' time. So, yeah, really important.
And Nat, how do you as a creative, all creatives are different, what's your approach when you get those timings? Do you leave it to the last minute?
Oh, well, timing and budget's obviously important, because if you've got to organise a photo shoot to get actors, go to a destination, cameramen, photographers, websites, everything comes into play. Sometimes you can do things quickly with stock shots, but I don't really like that approach. You want to get the best result for the client. So, but if they need something on air, they need it, when they need it. So we try and do that.
And the last one we have is budget. So pretty important, but also really good for the creative process.
Yeah, it's because it can direct the creative process. If a client has a really, a big budget, then obviously the creative ideas can expand and encompass bigger things, I guess. You have to use, the creative team would have to use their knowledge of the budget to direct the way that they're going to think about a campaign.
And Nat, when you're thinking about those things, you'd have some sort of rough numbers in your head, wouldn't you, as you're developing that along?
Yeah, definitely. I guess the creative process, it really depends. I mean, you can do good ideas very quickly, very cheaply, but if you have got more of a budget, you can just push it a little further and get a better idea, I think. Spend more time at the shoot, spend more time, getting more appropriate actors, better photos. You can wait till a really perfect sunset, or, it's unlimited, I guess.
And that's, I guess, part of the problem of whoever's the production manager on the job has to also juggle those competing, which is what I end up doing a lot on our projects. So that's a really good walkthrough of what a creative brief is, and particularly from our context, and what an account manager gets out of it and what a creative person gets out of it. Nat, a question for you. You're a painter, and anyone listening in, they can find you. What's your Instagram handle?
Nathaniel Hiller Art.
Nathaniel Hiller Art, and see see your painting. Just really interested to understand from you as a painter and a designer, what's the difference in the approach? Like, do you have a creative brief in your head when you're painting, or do you take anything from your painting that you can apply into a creative brief and getting a creative idea?
Well, it's funny actually. I was thinking about it last night, and what originally got me into graphic design was surf magazines in the 80s and 90s, and a guy called David Carson was a graphic designer, and he really brought, surfing photography to life with both typography and photography. And I always tried to paint, paint surfy scenes. I loved it. I used to windsurf a bit. I didn't surf as much, but it was the whole culture around the rip curl t-shirts and the lifestyle that I loved. And I could never really get the paintings right because I wasn't the technique that I used. I didn't spend enough time doing it, and as I grew older, it kind of stuck with me. So I took the kids out for a surf or a bushwalk or something, and I'd take photos, and I just tried to paint a few, and I got better and better, and the kids, started loving the paintings. And I started to sell a few. So I guess, my graphic design career and my art sort of started in the same spot. It was that being outdoors, the lifestyle, really. At one point in time, and it sort of branched off to be both. I guess art is very personal. Graphic design and advertising is done to a brief. The similarities would be that what's going on in the industry, so you live it. So I have favourite painters, I have favourite graphic designers, and I follow what they're doing, the trends, and I use that to inform, a brief or inform a style of art. It's often harder to do it with art because you actually have to physically paint it, whereas with graphic design, you have to piece it together. I spend most days just living it, and if I'm not working, I'm painting, and if I'm not painting, I'm working. I love it.
Awesome, and encourage people to look Nathaniel up on Instagram and have a look at his landscapes. They're absolutely awesome. So, Ali, let's delve into the world of the client here for a moment, something that you're expert at. What are your key principles in ensuring that you're setting up a relationship that's going to work with a client and deliver for them what they need?
Well, it's about being in touch with them. So communication with the client is really important. Keeping them across all elements of a job or a campaign as things happen. So right from the start, setting up the the right budget, the right timeline. They sign off on that. Having appropriate approval timelines within a job. So let's say creatives can work on something, and then the client's got enough time to look at that and give feedback, and taking on board their feedback as well, and passing that on to the creative team. Yeah, it's just about keeping them informed all the way, I suppose. It's that's part of the relationship with any client.
And then the tricky balance of the managing the creatives and keeping to deadlines, and what are some of the things that you do to keep that going along?
It's really about the planning up front, is having a timeline, making sure that the creative team or whoever's involved in the project has signed off on the timeline, and I'm cool with having a week for that, or I need a few more days, or and running that past the client too, so that they know how long they've got and when to be able to expect something in the end. So I think it's really just about it's all in Excel spreadsheets, unfortunately, but I love them. So I'm forever doing timelines and then trying to keep to them. So the more process and planning involved from my point of view is always a winner.
So you're the Chief Communications Officer, really, aren't you?
That's right, and the Chief Nagger and Wrangler in the office.
So Here's a really interesting one. I'd love to hear from both of you on this one. Changes and alterations. So you've got the brief together, and you feel like that, you know, the client signed off on the brief, and the creatives feel like they've answered the brief, and it comes back and there's alterations. You know, I don't like this. I didn't think it was going to be like this. Ali, for you in the first instance, you know, when is the client right? And when is the client wrong? And then if they are wrong, how do you tell them?
Well, look, it's interesting because any creative that gets presented to the client, it's always accompanied by a rationale. So we always do the creative to meet the brief. It doesn't go through unless it's met the brief. So that's one of the performance standards, I guess, that we would work to. They get a rationale with the creative, and you would hope that they can see the relationship between the rationale and what they're seeing in front of them. Yeah, when is it depends really on the kind of change they want. If they're saying something that is completely off brief, then I think you would draw their attention to that and say, look, that's not what you told us at the start. But it's all about carefully managing that. We would have hopefully managed expectations right from the start, but you know, sometimes if it's just a small tweak to a piece of copy or the colour of someone's shirt or something like that, then that's easier to handle. But yeah, sometimes you do have to push back and say to the client, no, this is what we're working to, is what you briefed us on at the start.
And also what is actually good practice and what's good marketing or advertising or ad making.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, they've come to us for a reason, and so I guess sometimes they have to take our advice.
Yep. Nat, what about you? When you've slaved away and you've come up, you know, sometimes with multiple ideas when you're presenting to a client, and you get down that pathway, and all of a sudden it starts getting picked apart. You know, how do you respond to that? What do you try to do?
I don't know what you're talking about. All my work goes straight through, unchanged. No, I mean, it's important to realise that the client works in their own business or for, you know, someone. They're very close to it. They interact with customers often. And, you know, it's our job to interpret what the public see in a short version in order to sell their product or advertise their service. So if they're really strong about, you know, and that's the importance of the brief, like you really have to tease out what they want. So there's minimal chance of changes and alterations. You know, get them on a photo shoot, get them on the, you know, on a TV production and really insert them into the process, and you'll really limit your chance of that happening. Often that's not possible, and you have to use your experience to kind of, you know, a storyboard or a mock-up, as close as you can get to the final output is really important too, because they'll see it and they'll picture it, and you know, and you'll work towards that outcome. So
I think Nat's right, actually. The work does really mostly go through, because I think if it's managed well enough from the start, you know, if a client has signed off a creative brief, really the changes are very, very few. Sometimes you might present 3 concepts at the start of a campaign, and the client might say, oh, I want a bit of this one and a bit of that one, and that's okay, because as long as you've presented stuff that works, then it's okay. Sometimes the last thing a creative likes is for a really sound concept to be pulled apart, but if things can work together, then it's okay. And
I've got to say, that doesn't actually happen to us very often. But I want to put you both on the spot. How would you answer this question? So you've given the asset to the client, and they've taken it home over the weekend. They come to you on Monday and they say, I showed it to my mum and dad, and they didn't like it. They thought it was X, Y, and Z. What do you say?
I'd say, are your mum and dad the target audience? That would be my first question.
Gold star to you, Ali. That's what the answer is. So, but that's what happens is people start getting proud, and all of a sudden they get, we've done this. They start getting feedback, and they might start second guessing.
Sometimes it gets a little bit personal. So you've always got to make sure, and even from internally as well, we don't look at things from a personal preference. It's not to do with that. It's to do with what the audience wants to see and what the message is going to work.
Great.
And what is refreshing for me, being a creative, it's not always the end. You know, the one single process is, or the one single piece of creative may not be the final, you know, finished product, because what we're finding is with social media, for example, we might run 10 versions of the same ad using, you know, slightly different creative, whether it's different photography or whatever, and we'll actually we'll monitor what is, you know, more successful, what's clicked through more, and we'll tweak it. So, I mean, that never happened in the past. It was always TV on, successful, you know, not successful, blah, blah, blah. Now you can just keep doing it and you know, change things up. It's really interesting.
So this has been a really good conversation, guys. Really getting into the nitty gritty for all of the people listening, particularly the marketing and advertising people. Hopefully we've given them a really good insight into sort of stepping into our realm and how do we manage those things. Just wanted to, before we finish up, just ask you for your top 2 takeaways. Nat, do you want to go first from our discussion today? What are the 2 things that you'd like to impart on the listener?
I think, you know, I live graphic design and advertising and art, and I spend most of my day looking at it and seeing the world from that point of view. So I think, you know, to trust a graphic designer, an art director, a creative director, they really do know what they're doing, because they do live it. You know, they see the world in that way. Second thing is simplicity. If you're going to be seen out there in the market, you want your idea to be taken in as simply as possible. And that's about it, I think.
Ali, what are your top 2 takeaways?
So I guess from my point of view, it's about thinking about it. It's the relationship with the client. Having really good communication, open communication, authentic communication with the client is really valuable. So the clients that I'm in touch with most, I feel, you know, that we probably do the best work for. Is that 1 or 2?
That can be 2 if you like. Well, I was going to say one of our values is trust, and we know that we do our best work when we have ongoing relationships with clients and they trust us to be able to progress their products or service or ideas about their brand. So, yeah, I'd agree with you entirely on that. That trust is so important.
And the trust on both sides. So us trusting, you know, the client, what the client does and the way they are with us, and the client trusting us too.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, guys. So that's Core Comms Creative Director Nat Hiller and Account Director Ali Brennan. So jump onto our Core of the Matter page at corecoms.com.au/podcast for links used in the making of this program. The Core of the Matter is produced by Core Comms based in Hobart, Tasmania. Join us on social media, leave us some feedback and tell us what you'd like us to cover in our next podcast. I'm Adrian Smith. Until next time, harness your passion and be a nice human.